Hello, and welcome to Sailing and Cruising the East Coast of the United States podcast. I'm Bela Musits.
And I'm Mike Wasserman.
This is our podcast about sailing the East Coast of the United States. In some episodes, we'll focus on passages and destinations. And in other episodes, we'll talk about boats, equipment, and techniques. And if we come across an interesting person, we'll try to get them as a guest on the show. Hey, but before we dive into this episode, we need to say a special thank you to our supporters. Several listeners are supporting the podcast using Patreon. If you would like to join them, you can go to patreon.com/sailingtheeast.
Yeah, we really appreciate it, Bela. All the listeners have been really amazing. Now, this is the last part, right, of really what's been kind of a 6-part episode with Simon and Sawyer. And I think the listeners need to know that it might be better to start with episode 93 before they do this one, 94. And if they haven't listened to anything with Simon and Sawyer before that, they might even want to go back to 84 and 85, right? Because I think we've done 84 and 85, and then 88 and 89, and then 93, and this one's 94. So there's really been 6 with them. Yeah,
that's right.
About
this is number 6.
thing.
Yep.
So
about their first crossing across the Atlantic. Yep.
So we'll put those in the show notes just to make sure everybody's got it. But for those of you that have been dutifully following along, right, it's the last part of a really amazing journey.
Yeah, it is. And so this is the final leg. This is the leg from Spain to the UK, where they crossed the infamous Bay of Biscay and the English Channel. So very different than their sail from Newport, Rhode Island to Horta. This is a much more busy and sort of much more part of the ocean that has a reputation, particularly the Bay of Biscay. So let's jump right into the interview.
All right. I'm excited to finish this one up.
Yeah. So, we had to get to England, right? That was kind of a mandatory destination. And, we're looking at the weather in Western Europe at this point. And it's not very tenable to go directly from Spain to England in one shot, because again, we can't, we just don't know what we're going to hit 4 days out, 5 days out. And so instead we decided to do like a 4-day passage across the Bay of Biscay to Brest in France. And then from France, then it's like a 2-day passage to Southampton. So our next leg was, from La Coruña to Brest. And that was also very weather dependent. We ended up, in this case, leaving a lot earlier than we had anticipated to take advantage of a weather window, because we weren't sure when the next one was going to be, right? It could have been another couple of weeks before we'd have that opportunity again. And even so, we ended up having a bit of a hairy situation coming into Brest.
Our worst weather experience, our most dramatic sea story was definitely crossing the Bay of Biscay. And, the Bay of Biscay is kind of infamous. Yes. And we were a little bit scared about it. And it was, a challenge to cross. It's only, so it's only 350 nautical miles, more or less, from the northern Spain to Brittany, to Brest, which back when we were in Horta, we're like, 350 miles, right? No big deal. It's like 3 days, 2.5 days. We can just pick a good window and go. One of the reasons it's a challenging place to cross in later summer is that you really don't usually even get 3 days. It's these, again, lows are coming off of Greenland or the Canadian provinces. They're spinning counterclockwise, and the kind of tail of that spin often ends up coming into the Bay of Biscay. And then the coast of France there is a big, long, concave coast where the seafloor goes from 12,000 feet up the continental shelf up to about 100 meters within about 100 miles of the coast. So you get a lot of fetch, a lot of weather, big rollers, and then it hits the continental shelf, and it makes it a pretty volatile area. So we were hoping to stay and sail around Spain a little bit longer, but weather wasn't looking good. And then we were talking to our weather people every day, and they said, hey, you got a 2.5 day window here, 2 3/4 day. And if you don't take that, you might be a week or 2 week out. We don't know. So it's up to you, but you could go now. You're probably still going to hit something right at the end, but you could go. And so we decided to do that. And that would require us leaving actually early in the morning one day. So wait for sun to rise. We could get out of the harbor, which we weren't that familiar with. and then sail as quickly as we could to try to get to Brest before the weather. So we had some issues with even leaving, and
I know.
talk about that.
We so it was a pretty choreographed, because the way the timing of this passage worked is, we were going to leave, I forget the exact days, but we were going to leave on day 1, and we had to get into Brest by the evening of day 4, I believe, because that's when the next low pressure system was hitting, and it was a big system, and we don't want to enter Brest at night, this unfamiliar harbor.
Someone once told us that, Bela. It was 5 nevers. Never enter a harbor at night. You said that, and that's what we were thinking about. 3 days. Actually, it was 3 days across.
Was it 3 days? Okay.
Yeah.
And but in order to make, so it was possible, but it was going to be tight. We're going to have to move pretty fast, and we were comfortable doing it because 3 days is within our motoring range, right? So even if we had to motor all the way across, we could do it.
Mm-hmm.
So we wake up at, it was 5 in the morning, 6 in the morning in A Coruña on day 1. We're ready to go. Turn on the engine starts up. Start taking off the dock lines, and the engine dies. And it took us like 2.5 hours to get it going again. And it ended up being a clogged fuel filter, but of course, you replace the fuel filter, and then you got to prime the engine, and it took a while for us to.
Yeah. So remember on that trip, from a couple things. So in Horta, we were low on, we pretty much used our fuel getting to Horta, right? So we had to refuel, which we did. And it's kind of well known in the circles, people cruising around Europe, that the diesel in Europe has a lot of biodiesel in it. So it's prone to growing stuff, which can clog the filter. And the less frequently the fuel is changed, the more likely at the pump, right? The more likely it's going to be kind of contaminated. And Horta's a little town on a little island, and there is traffic coming through, but they're not pumping thousands of gallons a day, right? So we filled up with fuel that was okay, but probably a little marginal. And then, as Sawyer mentioned, that trip to Spain was a beam reach, so really rolly, right, for 6-7 days. So all the sludge and stuff in the bottom must have come in. We made it into Spain without noticing. Everything was fine, and we started up the engine on that day we were going to leave fine, and then within 3 minutes the engine
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I guess lesson there would be, we probably should have checked, maybe even proactively changed our fuel filter the day before. But we've never had that happen before. I mean, people talk about it. In sailing, we've never had an issue with a fuel filter. We changed it. We changed before we left on our trip.
Sure.
Never got gummed up.
Yeah. In hindsight, it was pretty lucky. It would have been really inconvenient if we were, leaving the marina or something and the engine died and we couldn't get it started again.
That's my nightmare, right? Because in my marina, I have a narrow channel I have to go out, and coming in or going out, that's my nightmare. My engine's going to die.
So Sawyer's at the helm. I'm untying the dock lines on the bow, and he's like saying something. I don't know what he's saying, and then eventually he's like, "There's no engine." But if I had untied the dock lines a little faster, we would have been drifting into the boat behind us. So we got it lucky. Yes, yeah. So now in future legs, we would check and change our fuel filters. And I don't know, I feel like now, before we go, we should start the engine and let it run for like 10 minutes, just kind of make sure it's going. So, but this is critical for us because, we had a tight weather window, everything kind of had to work really well, and we already were starting like a 2.5 hour delay. So it made it a little bit tighter on that trip.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the last thing I'll say on the engine, because, Bela, you're with us for this one. We've had the bow thruster fail a couple of times that we have on our boat. And, we have a working bow thruster now. We love using it. But we've learned to dock pretty comfortably without the bow thruster.
Without it. Yep.
And so when we have it, it's a bonus. And so, I think with a lot of these pieces of equipment that you rely on, you really take it for granted until it just dies on you.
Mm-hmm.
And now, whenever we're coming into a marina, at least I'm thinking in the back of my head, like, what happens if the engine died right now?
Yeah.
Right. Is our anchor ready to run?
No, so we've done those things, right? We've turned on the windlass, and we've like unfastened our anchor. Common sense stuff, but if the engine dies, we can run up quickly and drop our anchor.
Yeah.
And we've thought about that now that our engine actually.
Now that actually happened. Yeah.
So a trip up to
Well,
across the UK.
before you go there, I wanted to just bring up a couple things. Engines dying. So episode 79 and 80 is a story with the guy named Mark Teason, who has a Catalina 445, and he was coming into a harbor and his engine died. and he ended up on the beach.
Wow.
Yeah. So that was a great story. And his engine died because his engine died, and then he hit something and he couldn't steer the boat. And I mean, just, it cascades into all sorts of stuff. The other thing I wanted to say which is interesting is I've seen these two filter setups, where you can basically throw a valve and switch from filter A to filter B. And I always thought that's a good idea. And the other thing I think is interesting is, given that fuel filters are so important on diesel engines, it's a pain in the butt to change them. You think they would figure out a way somehow that, you could just unscrew the darn thing and screw the new one on and push a button and it primes it and does whatever it's supposed to do, because it's like, it's a freaking nightmare.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's actually like a lot of things on the boat that you don't do. Not that you don't think you need to do it. It's just that it's a pain in the neck and you don't want to do it.
I mean, if it was just unscrew the filter, screw a new one on, you'd do it a couple times a year just for the peace of mind, right?
Well, so actually, I mean, a quick aside, but I think it's interesting when we were leaving Rhode Island, we changed our fuel filters. I mean, in that process, we ended up getting like a couple pints of diesel fuel.
Yes.
We caught right in a can, so that now we got to get rid of it. The marina no longer takes it. I guess they had rule changes, or they had some problems, people abusing the system. So we were asked, well, where do you drop it off? Well, there's like a hazardous materials reclamation site that the state runs, but it's only open from whatever to whatever. So it was really challenging. We ended up going to 5 or 6 auto zones till we found one where the manager agreed to take it. Anyway, just a little aside story.
Yeah, they certainly the marine industry certainly hasn't made that interesting, or excuse me, hasn't made that easy and convenient. And it's something that most people with a diesel engine at some point in time are going to encounter.
Yeah, it's really important. And, it took us a couple hours to fix, but we were at the dock. It would be really hard out, in a big sea state with you're seasick and everything else, and your head's underneath the engine.
You're trying to bleed the lines and stuff, and diesel splashing all over the place.
Yeah, not sure you've seen videos of people doing it. So it's a real thing, and now we know to allow the extra time, or to maybe be proactive about changing our fuel filters and things like that.
Yeah. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt. Okay. So let me ask you another question. So is there a way that you can kind of hop up along the coast and not do line across the Bay of Biscay? Can you basically, do day hops up the coast of France?
It's not great. So there aren't that many ports that are good. So it's notorious bay for lots of reasons, and one of them is that there's a really tremendous tide, which we didn't fully appreciate, and that was one of our problems when we got into Brest. There's actually when we got into Brest, it was a 23-foot tide that day.
Holy smokes!
So it's not like you just go and like anchor in a nice little spot, right? Or this is a nice little town. Let me just pull up here. You really need to know the local landscape. And there's few places that you can go. So there's that. And then actually, again, the shape of the bay is like this. So it's a long way out of your way to go like that, which means you're just increasing the chance of getting bad weather.
Sure.
Yeah.
And the third issue that we were running into with this particular, weather forecast, not just on our weather window, but for the next couple of weeks, is that the wind was predominantly coming from the west. And because it has this crescent shape, right? So it's easy to sail along the coast of Spain. And I think there are some cool places on the coast of Spain that people do. And then maybe the southern part of coastal France. But it's really hard to sail on that top part.
Around, you're going into the wind.
Because you're just trying to sail upwind, right? So it's not just like little harbor hopping. You'd be sailing upwind into 25 knots.
Yeah. I mean, like La Rochelle is in the middle, and that's another famous sort of sailing nation in France. So there's some real sailors there. But no, it's most people just try to cut across and do it quickly. And so that's what we tried to do. So we actually made great time. We left again, once we got our engine going, the skies were blue and the sun was out. We were doing like 6.5 knots, and then we had, this was probably our strongest wind and biggest waves in general. Looking back through our notes, we had 12 to 15 foot seas for pretty much the whole way, and the wind was, we were going like past 90, so like about 80 degrees, 75 degrees. So we're getting apparent winds of close to 30 knots, 28 knots. So I think on the second day, actually, we took our main down, and our head sail, we just had like a 4 foot by 4 foot little triangle, and we were still going 6.5 knots. But the boat was good. We were, sun was out, boat was good, and the way the geography is too, as you get up towards Brest, there are some little rocky islands that are about 40 miles west of the entrance to the Brest Harbor. And you got to go around those.
Of course.
Yeah, they're called something terrible, like, the rocks of death, right? So you got to go around those rocks.
But it's in French, so it sounds really romantic.
So you go around that, and then you've got, I think it's 35 nautical miles, kind of east-northeast, to get to this very, very narrow inlet into the Brest Inner Harbor. And that inlet's about 1.5 miles wide and 3 miles long. It's called the Goulet, which is means like bottleneck. That's what it is. So anyway, so our goal, we had it all planned out, right? Our goal, the storm is coming, it's supposed to hit around like 7 o'clock at night. And the storm was forecast to be upwards of 50 knots and 30-foot seas, and a big low coming in, one of these big lows. But our idea is we can get up there, we can make this right turn, the storm comes in behind us, and now we're running with it, and we'll probably beat it mostly, and we'll get into Brest, and it should be fine. So we got to the turn at around noon, as I recall. And we're like, okay, we're on time now, right? So we're doing like our 7 knots, so we got like maybe like 5 hours to go, and then means we should get to Brest by 5 o'clock, and we're going to just beat the storm. And I remember we as we made the turn, now we're starting to get into like the AIS like field that we can see. We're starting to see the bay, and we can see 25 miles, and we only saw 2 boats in total in this 30 mile by 30 mile like bay. I'm like, wow, where are all the boats? And we talked about this before. When you're out in the ocean, you don't think straight, right? So we're like, where are all the boats? And I think Sawyer's like, maybe they don't really do fishing in France. Like, it's not really a fishing culture. I'm like, oh, you're right. It's more like baking culture. And we're like, yeah.
What do they know that we're not aware of?
It took us like 10 minutes of like talking, and then I forget, one of us said, it reminds me of that famous last words, like, hey, I wonder where the mother bear is. Right. So, hey, why are there only 2 boats here? So, basically everyone knew that a big storm was coming, and that kind of kicked us into gear, and we started trying to make as much speed as we could. Yeah. So I'll turn over to you, because you handled the last part.
I did, yeah. So we were sailing in, and what kind of 2 things ended up happening. Well, really three variables all started changing at once. One, it started getting dark as we were entering this harbor. So light levels going down. 2, the wind speed is increasing. So when we made that turn around the islands, it was probably 25 knots or so, but it started clicking up every hour. And then the third one is, as we started getting closer and closer to the Goulet, we were starting getting this crazy adverse tide, like 4 knots of current against us. Yeah. And we've never seen waves like this, the wind against current. And it just kept building and building and building. And, it got to the point, pretty soon we kind of looked at each other and we're like, all right, grab the helm, undo the wind vane, and
we closed the companionway.
Locked
it up. Really only a minute before a wave, came into the cockpit. Wow. Yeah. So, we had this. So Brest is this quite large bay, inner bay, probably 10 miles across, going through this narrow channel, and it's a 23-foot tide. And it's, again, shame on us. We didn't know all the local knowledge. We didn't know that there's this much of a tide, and we've been thinking about the weather a lot. We hadn't really been thinking about the tide charts, right? Because we've been ocean sailing for so long, and so we end up making this turn, hitting this bottleneck, as they call it in English. We were getting 35 knots across the deck, so close to 40 knots of true wind, with a 4-knot current coming against us. And it's like everyone talks about that wind against current, right? We had these waves were really steep. They were probably still in that 15-foot range, but when you look behind, they're not like a nice kind of rolly wave. They're like that Japanese woodblock print, you know, waves like this. So yeah, and they were not just coming behind us now. Now it's like a washing machine, right? They're coming from the right and the left. So yeah, so basically we stood together in the cockpit, Sawyer steered.
Yeah.
And he was steering, you know, trying to go through each wave, trying to make it not break over us.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think, you know, I felt in control. I think the boat handled it really well. You know, we were under sail all the way through the harbor, and you know, it was balanced and good, but it took a lot of concentration and a lot of manipulation of the helm to keep the boat on course. You know, it was you know, definitely outside of what like an autopilot or a wind vane would be able to do.
Yeah.
And it, you know, it did feel like the stakes were high because we were, you know, like we came into this harbor, you know, we're going dead downwind. We got the whisker pole up with the reef Genoa. You know, we don't really have the space to maneuver, right? We didn't really have time or the ability to take the pole down easily. So yeah, it was just, you know, it worked out, but it did require a lot of concentration.
Yeah. So we broke the rule, Bela, of never, you know, enter a harbor at night. You had to. So we got that bottleneck at, I think, around midnight, and then we still had another hour to go up this channel. Yeah, about 3.5 miles up a channel to get to the marina. We had the first one was full. We had the second one, and you know, by then it's raining, and you can't really see the buoys, and they're not the same as on your chart exactly. So it's a little stressful. Well, we made it around the breakwater, and yeah, we threw on our spreader lights. I think we mentioned maybe once before. We put these really bright spreader lights, like a fishing boat, and it lit up the whole area, which is great. And then we were able to pull into the concrete dock, and that was the probably only time we've ever, you know, kind of embraced. No, we embraced, but embraced upon like getting to our marina. Yeah, I mean,
You kissed the ground.
Yeah,
we were very happy. But as, you know, once we finally got to the dock, and we didn't realize this during this last hour or so, there was another boat that was following us right behind us, but we were so focused on in front of us, we didn't see it. They came in, and once we pulled into the concrete dock, they came in front of us, but they had some problems with their steering. It was also a 2-person crew. They were pretty frazzled. They couldn't see very well, and they actually smashed into the dock in front of us and put a hole in their boat. They put several gashes in their boat, but they put an actual hole in the boat. We ran and helped them and got them kind of tied up, and you know, they were okay, and they probably had to get some repairs done. But it was a kind of a storm. The next morning when we got up and went to the cafe, the front page of the paper was about this crazy storm. So we definitely beat it in.
Yeah. And was the storm predicted?
Yeah, it was predicted. I think it ended up being stronger than they expected when we left. Usual. They seem to always get stronger than not weaker. No, it was predicted. You know, we knew it was coming. We had to get in. Again, we lost a couple hours in the beginning, and the biggest challenge for us actually was this wind against current. You know, so we got the winds that we expected, 30, 35, 40 knots maybe, but you know, we were thinking we're making the turn that's behind us.
Right.
You know,
We weren't thinking of
apparent wind of 35. We'll just get into the harbor.
I mean, you know, so the vice versa, or the opposite scenario. Like if the tide had been, instead of 4 knots against us, 4 knots with us, right? We would have been doing, you know, 11, 12 knots. Into this harbor with a very relaxed sea state, and we probably would have been docked by nightfall, right? But we hadn't really thought through the tide component of this. It was the first time that we had experienced like a really strong tide.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because when we do coastal sailing, we're always looking at the tides and we're thinking a lot about it, and we're looking at active captain and what people say. Hey, I guess we kind of got out of the habit, and when you're out in the middle of the ocean, it's not really a factor,
right?
And it became a factor. So, but those tides are significant. So actually, the northern part of France and the UK, really serious tides, and it changes how you sail and where you stop and when you leave, things like that.
Yeah. So, well, some good lessons learned there, huh?
Yeah, some basic ones, really.
I know.
Some people are gonna watch this and go like, "Ah, these guys are so stupid. Like, how do they not know that?" But it's there's a lot to be thinking about when you're sailing.
Absolutely.
And sometimes the really basic things can catch you. Again, we were okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember too. It's this like a couple hours where we're going against the tide and the rain and looking at the buoys and we're trying to like focus. So we're looking at the chart a lot. The other thing I noticed, besides the fact that no other boats out there, is on the chart, there's all these wrecks, like 1,000 wrecks. I mean, part of it, of course, they've got 500 years of history or 1,000 years of history, right? But it's also, plenty of other boats in the past, right, have been caught on a lee shore and gotten stuck. It was kind of, I don't know, made you think.
Mm-hmm. It did.
Yeah, I think the other thing that pops into my mind here is you guys had that delay in the beginning.
Yeah.
And you sort of get focused on that. And you say, we're leaving today. And, at 2 hours can make a big difference.
Yep.
And particularly with a tide, because maybe the tide has now changed direction, right? So sometimes that notion of always taking a step back when there's a bump in the road to what your plan is and saying, okay, does the course I'm on still make sense?
Sure.
Because I know I lose sight of that all the time, right? I mean, it's like I'm like so focused. Okay, I had an hour delay. It was only an hour. That's fine. I'm glad I got that fixed. Let's keep pressing on.
Yeah.
And then there's another hour delay, and then before you know it,
for sure.
Oh my gosh.
And I think the thing with
yourself
these
in a predicament.
multiple day passages, right, is that you really, it's very difficult to know when you're going to arrive. You can't. It's 3-4 days out, right? So you come up with this. We're going to average 5.5 knots, and we're going to, it's a 400-mile journey. So we think this, right? But you really don't know. So I think what ideally in a perfect world, if you have the window, right, is that you have like an extra half day or a day kind of around your destination, where maybe you arrive and you just sort of just hang out, right? Or you slow down, or you heave to, and you wait for morning to arrive, or you wait for the tide to be favorable. It's very difficult to have it, you just come in hot into your destination 4 days later. But I mean, in this case, yeah, we did think about some of these things. This window looked like the best we were going to have for a week or two, and we did have a little time pressure. We felt now, and we felt like it was the best decision, and it was okay.
Mm-hmm.
But
yeah, don't forget the basics, I guess, is the lesson there.
Yeah. Well, good. Okay, so now you're in France, and where to next? Talk about the next leg.
This is our last leg. So we go from France to England, and this is a short passage. It's only a couple of days.
180 miles, something like that.
Yeah.
Miles,
and we're just going to go around the tip of France and straight into the south coast of England. For me, this actually ended up being one of the most challenging, at least the most challenging 24 hours of the sailing trip, because there was so much traffic, and so it made it really hard to sleep. I mean, like the AIS alarms are going off constantly. We're always making course corrections or changing our sail plan. So what would have been 180 miles, pretty easy. But it was a really hard 180 miles.
Yeah. So let me ask you a question. I know it's a sailboat, but if it's that dense traffic, why not just motor through something like that?
I mean, I can't remember how much we were sailing, how much we were motoring. When we were going through the traffic.
So I remember, we started out sailing with the tide.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Then we motored at night, parallel to the shark separation zone because of no wind.
Yeah.
And then when we turned, we had wind. I don't know. I mean, often, we're moving well with our sails, right? We're actually going faster with our sails, and we can go in most directions. So,
part of it too. Well, so I guess there's the two things that come to my mind, because it's a fair question. Is like, number one, I think our maneuverability under sail is actually not much lower than our maneuverability motoring, right? I mean, we're pretty comfortable, configuring our boat, at least in this case, in a way where it's pretty maneuverable. Mm. So, we're probably sailing with, Genoa, no whisker pole, no main.
Yeah, we took the whisker pole down, so we had a little more options.
And so that gives us pretty much any direction we want. The other one that's I think actually much more important, and I didn't fully appreciate this until we started ocean sailing, is the motion of the boat when you're under sail is completely different.
Yes.
So if you're out there in the English Channel with the tide and you got the wind on the beam and you don't have a sail up, it is almost untenable down below.
Okay.
So
that's good. Yeah. So there's many cases we put our main up where we didn't really need to.
Yeah.
From a adding velocity standpoint, just to kind of
Stabilize the boat.
So the English Channel is it's also got serious currents, about 3.5 knots. And so you get this wind on current issue in the channel itself. So the waves weren't super big, maybe 8-10 feet, but they were a much shorter period and much choppier. So it was gloomy too, remember?
it was it was cloudy.
That was the low point. Oh boy. It was just gloomy and choppy, and we couldn't sleep more than 10 minutes because of all the traffic. So we had our timer set, 10 minutes, we just press repeat.
And the spot where we ended up crossing the shipping lanes in hindsight was probably the most stressful spot we could have picked, because we ended up crossing the shipping lanes. I'm gonna try and paint the picture here for a second. So it's essentially a 4-lane highway, right? We've got 2 lanes coming towards you, 2 lanes going away from you. But you have one group of ships that are rounding the coast of Spain, and then you have another group of ships that are rounding the coast of Ireland, right? So either the ships that are going to New York, right, are passing through Ireland, and the ships that are going through the Suez Canal, right, are going around Spain. And so you have these 2 lines of these 2 highways coming up, and they have to merge into one and then continue east. And we ended up crossing right where they were all merging. So we had the equivalent of, I don't know what, 8 lanes of ships, and they're crisscrossing each other, right? Because there's no on-ramp. There's no bridge over, right? So the ships are weaving back and forth, and we can't figure out what they're doing.
You don't know which direction they're going. It looks like they're coming like this, right? But they're planning, of course, to turn in 3 miles. So
it was. So was that another point in the trip where you looked at each other and said, "Why are there no other pleasure boats out here? All there's out here is these big ships, and there's no other smaller boats."
That is the point. That is the point where we heard it. So. This other thing is different. In the U.S., at least in the Northeast, where we're most familiar sailing, but I think most of the U.S., there's a lot of radio traffic.
Yes.
Too much radio traffic, actually. People are constantly chattering on the radio.
16.
Yeah, 16. Easy. We didn't see that in Europe really at all. No. People are very judicious with their radio traffic. And this area where the one guy got on the radio and was, using real seaman's language at this one sailboat we didn't see that didn't have its AIS turned on. So
it is a funny cultural difference, right? On the East Coast, you get the radio's constantly going off, right? The Coast Guard's on there, and you got the security calls and people complaining about wakes and fishermen talking to each other. You don't even hear the Coast Guard out there on Channel 16. It's eerily quiet.
Yep, nice. No radio checks.
Yeah, no.
No radio checks.
Also radio check.
But yeah, it was like we're trying to cross this 8-lane highway, and it essentially just meant that we couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep, and so it was just hard.
It was just hard. Yeah, the upside was we were close to our final destination. That was exciting.
Sure.
You see something. You can see the coast of England, right? The White Cliffs and everything that you think about. It was just it's a hard. It's a hard piece of water to cross. It's always been that way, right? As is Brittany. So I have a lot of respect for those sailors, and we met a lot in northern France, and then in the English Channel area. It's a tough place to sail.
Yeah.
Joke. One thing that was kind of striking, Sawyer I think picked up on it, is that most of the boats we saw were cruising, like local cruising boats at this point, right? They weren't crossing the ocean. That was their home waters. And so they weren't set up for long distance cruising, meaning they didn't have solar panels that you would see if a boat, or didn't have like a wind vane. However, from a safety gear standpoint, they were like ocean sailors. They all had dam buoys. Mm-hmm. They all had life rafts on their deck. You had the sense that even though they were going a little day sail around Isle of Wight, they were prepared for serious ocean sailing.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
I wonder if some of that, I mean, it's good to hear, but I wonder if some of that's regulatory.
it could be.
Some European countries take a more stringent view of some of those things.
Yeah, no, it also could be that, and maybe maybe it is with the AS. Maybe they've now mandated it.
Yeah.
I would say in general, the boats we saw, I mean, our whole trip, were better prepared, more sort of earnest sailors than in general you see
Sure.
on the East Coast. Of course, there's a lot of great sailors and earnest sailors in the East Coast too, but it's not that hard to jump in a boat and go around, as you know, right? So,
It's scaringly easy.
I know. I know. No, so I mean, people are all, and they take it seriously. I think there's a lot of pride. These are, real seafaring kind of nations. They take a lot of pride in seamanship. So
Yeah.
yes, we had. So I mean, not to make a big dramatic story, but we did have some equipment failures then too. We had a crash jibe actually. So our normals, I think our winds were around 20 knots, not super strong.
Yeah.
We were sailing downwind, maybe a couple hours. We have a boom brake to keep our main in position, and it works great. But we had a really, kind of unexpected gust, probably about 40, 45 knot gust, a little bit in the wrong direction.
Yeah.
And we had a crash jibe, so we actually broke the traveler.
Oh.
Yeah, and the boom of the sorry, I get called. The boom, the bolt holding the gooseneck onto the mast came out, and it was sort of hanging by a thread on one side. So the boom wasn't completely off, but the boom was sort of now and not really functional. And then our jib ended up kind of backing and got all tangled up on itself. So basically, we're only like 8 hours from our destination, and we have no main, and we have no jib.
And are you guys still in the shipping lanes, or the
No,
traffic
we're
separate?
past that actually. Yeah.
Okay.
But it was just sort of frustrating, kind of, and embarrassing that we had let this happen.
I know. Yeah, we're sailing into Southampton, and the boat's in complete tatters. That was disheartening for sure.
But we made it.
I'm sure the locals were thinking, how did we ever lose that war with the guys from the United States?
Well, Sawyer takes a lot of pride in his seamanship. So we actually stopped about, 3 hours before the port, and we just stopped, and then we got the boom back on, and we were able to get the jib unfurled, and we got everything all ship shape, so we could enter the harbor. What'd you say, with honor? Or something?
With honor.
So we did. We made it. It was good.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent. So you made it. So if you reflect back on the whole thing,
yeah.
Is there one or two or three things that were real takeaways for each of you? And it doesn't have to be about sailing. It could just be, hey, you know what? This was a wonderful 2 weeks with, family together, right? I mean, that's fair.
For me, it was an amazing once in a lifetime experience. I'm not sure if I'm ready yet to commit to a twice in a lifetime experience. It was amazing. It was certainly kind of life changing, but it was hard, and I have such a renewed appreciation for folks who do true ocean sailing. It's just a very different.
Yeah.
It's not coastal sailing times 20. Times the time. It's a whole different situation. But you meet all these different folks out there that it's a different culture. I don't know. That was really cool. The coolest part were the people, especially in the Azores.
Yeah, I say it was hard. I think I mentioned this last time, right? It's the hardest thing ever done, physically and mentally. That mental part is something. The highs and lows are extreme. You're doing something, doing one thing for 17 days, or that's short, 20 days, 25 days. That's just hard mentally to do. It was great experience. I'm super happy I did it. It was life changing. Everyone says life changing, right? And it's like a throwaway term, but it was life changing. When you're out in the middle of the ocean and the ocean doesn't care about you, and you just have to rely on yourself. I tend to worry a lot about stuff. I'm a goal-driven person who worries about my job and about finances. I'm always thinking about that. And I'm the kind of person that goes on vacations, always looking at his phone. That kind of person. I didn't think once about that stuff because it's so meaningless when you're out there. The ocean doesn't care. No one cares. You're the little speck, and you do need to care about some stuff, but it's not that. And that was, honestly, it's probably the first time since like kindergarten that I wasn't worried about whatever, something that I wasn't doing at the moment. So that's different. And again, I'm sure people talk about that and it's like a throwaway stuff, but it's real.
Yeah.
I know we've been back for a while now, and at least for the moment, I still have that feeling, right? I'm kind of taking things in stride a little bit better, I think, things in perspective. People ask me about the trip a little bit. It's kind of hard to talk about it in terms of like how I felt because it's hard to express, but I would say it, at least for now, it does feel like a reset, like a mental reset. I've done this, kind of wipe the slate clean and kind of think again about what's important and what you want to do in life.
Yeah. Excellent. That's a great way to summarize and wrap this episode up. While you were saying that, it got me thinking about, I've never done anything like this. I have no desire to do it. And now after talking to you guys, I even have less desire to do it. But I marvel at the people who've done like 8, 9, 10, 15 Atlantic crossings.
Oh, or the solo. I mean, we were a small crew, but we were still 2 or 3 of us, 3, Dad to Azores, and then 2 of us after that. I mean, solo sailors, or
I don't know how they do that.
Sailing in the winter, or
we saw folks sailing with kids, young kids.
Oh boy,
yeah.
There's some really hardy people out there. I give them credit, and
But it gets back to sort of, I think what you were just saying is that it takes you down to the basic elements of life and survival. Can I eat? Can I sleep? And can I poop?
No, right? Your world becomes a lot smaller, and it becomes a lot more
simple.
Right. It's the small things and the things that are right in front of you that matter on a day-to-day basis.
But those are the important things. And I think there's a common thread through, whether people climb Mount Everest or whether they hike the Pacific Crest Trail or, live in the jungles of the Amazon for a month. All of that gets reduced down to those same elements.
Mm-hmm.
The environment's different, but those elements of survival and dealing with unexpected and how you process that and how you deal with it is all the same. I think that's what drives people to do some of those things.
That's what's alluring. Yeah. It's really tough, but it's really alluring as well. So.
Yeah. Hey, well, this was great. I really thank you guys for coming back on the podcast and sort of wrapping up this whole big trip of yours. First Atlantic crossing, and boy, congratulations. My hat's off to you guys for doing it. I'm envious, but at the same time, I'll be happy to remain envious. And it's outside of the scope of what I want to do, but it was a really, really great story, and I'm so glad it turned out well.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for having us. It's always been a great chance for us to reflect, so we appreciate that. And thinking back about it, thanks to you for getting us started on this path. We were not going to be able to make it from Florida to Rhode Island if we didn't have you on that first trip.
Well, thank you. You're gracious to say that. Thanks, guys.
Well, Bela, this is a big emotional relief. And I mean, I'm sitting here on land, right? And I know we knew we made it, right? Because you were kind of part of their land support team, as people know this. But it was great to put this last podcast episode together and hear the end of the story from their mouths. What struck you most about this final leg of their adventure?
So I think a couple of things. The whole waiting for weather and getting a good weather window seemed to play a much bigger role in this sort of final leg of the trip than it did in the long leg of their trip, Newport to Horta. It was much more sort of a factor in their trip here, which was just several days long. And, you know, you always sort of plan about trying to arrive at your new destinations sort of early in the morning or midday. So you're not pulling into a new unknown port in the dark and in the night. So, you know, everyone says don't do that. And, but you gotta, you know, sort of think through, man, maybe you're going to get delayed, and then what are you going to do? And there's plenty of people who say, okay, it looks like because of delays or whatever, we're not making as much progress as we wanted to. We're going to get into the harbor at night. So what they do is they slow down, or they stop sailing and they just wait outside the harbor, or you know, or they zigzag back and forth all, you know, for half the night waiting for sunrise to enter the new harbor. That's a great technique, but if the weather's crappy, that's all of a sudden that doesn't become that attractive anymore. So I think you got to think through that. You got to think through, you know, if you have a 5-day trip, what's your weather going to be like on day 6, 7, and 8? Because if you're not going as fast as you thought you would, then how does that change what you would do? And I think the other interesting thing they talked about was the huge tides and the tidal current as a result of that, and how it impacted their progress. Right? They didn't sort of think. I mean, we don't have that here in the United States on this side of the globe all that much, except for the Bay of Fundy. So people don't think about it all that much.
And Bela, just to jump in, because I've seen this with my own eyes here, and if you haven't seen it, it's amazing. When the tides are that big, you go. And if you go to the beach and you're used to seeing the waves come in, as far as you can see, there's no water. Like the water is gone as far as you can see. It's absolutely unbelievable how different the tides are here in the North Sea and in the Atlantic with these giant tides that I've never seen anything like that in the U.S. And it really is remarkable.
Yeah. Yeah. And you know, all of this stuff, at least for me, I always think about, and I think I said this before, I would rather leave in less comfortable conditions, knowing that when I arrive where I'm going to be, the conditions are good, as opposed to the opposite. I'm going to leave under really nice weather, but it might be a little iffy when I get in. And the reason I say that is because by the time I'm done with a 2 or 3 or 4 or 10-day passage, I'm tired. I'm sorry, folks. Maybe you're better than I am, but man, I'm tired. I'm fatigued. I'm anxious to get there. You know, I'm probably making decisions that may not be optimal all the time. So I like to kind of flip that weather window sort of opposite of which I think a lot of people do. I like to say, okay, I'd rather leave under weather and I'm going to be less comfortable for the first day or two, knowing that for the rest of the trip, and if it takes a little longer, things are going to be great, as opposed to kind of doing it the other way around.
Yeah, I totally agree. And Bela, at least from my side, the end of the conversation you had with them was so cool, right? That the lessons that they learned, their takeaways, I mean, these experiences, obviously there's things that are just totally, you know, unbelievable to me. But I really thought that they had really done some cool thinking about this and kind of what they accomplished, the challenges they faced and overcame, and what this meant to them as a family, right? Since this was kind of a family trip, people remember back to how this worked. I mean, you know, you have a little different perspective on all this. As you're their friend, you were their land support, right? What do you think the listeners should really take away from this? Maybe the things that weren't said, you know, at the end by them.
Well, I think, look, if you're a parent and you know, your kids get to a certain age, they're starting to leave, right? So Sawyer's in graduate school, you know, he's embarked on his own life. And so as a parent, to be able to do a trip like this with your child or your children, or any kind of big trip, whether it would be, you know, you're going on a cross country, you know, trip with them, or a backpacking trip or something, I think any of those things are really, really great, because it's a very different experience than your normal living together on a day-to-day basis. You know, it's not like you get up in the morning, you go to work, they go do what they do, hang out with their friends, etc. I mean, you're hanging out all the time, and you're accomplishing something together. It's this shared experience and shared accomplishment together. whether you're hiking the Appalachian Trail or whether you're sailing across the Atlantic, or you're just going out for a day and a half sail, in Narragansett Bay. I think that's something special about that. So I think if you can do that, it's wonderful. And I think that's true, not just for your children, if you do it with children, but you do it with friends. I mean, I've gone sailing with friends. I mean, that's how Simon and our first sailing trip was. I helped them bring their boat up to from Florida. I've known Simon for many, many years prior to that. And that was a special experience. So any of these things that you can do where there's sort of a goal in the end, it's a mutual experience, you're working together to accomplish it, I think are great. So I think that was one big takeaway. If you have that opportunity, do it. Regardless of sort of, it could be a child, it could be a spouse, it could be a partner, it could be a friend, any of those things. I think it's just great. It'll be very memorable. I think the other couple takeaways for me was sort of making the go, no go decision. Okay, when are we going to depart? And the pressures that are driving you to make that decision. I think you want to be really conscious of that, because that's when people get into trouble. I have several friends of mine who are private pilots, and they go through the same challenges, right? Where, I think with an airplane, it's even worse. I mean, once you take off, you got to land. And so, they always talk about, man, a schedule's the most dangerous thing. And that scheduling pressure of leaving is really bad. And I think the other third thing for me was this whole notion of the shipping channels and how much more complicated or stressful that can make the whole experience. I don't really experience them where I'm at. Yeah, we see ships once in a while, but it's, one every 5 or 6 hours. But here it was like really, really busy. So this notion of sort of shipping channels and all the other traffic that's around, I think was another big takeaway for me.
Yeah, I imagined it feeling like you're on a bicycle on a highway filled with semi-trucks going really fast, right? And they said it was like this game Frogger, right? But I imagine that, because they're a lot slower than these ships, right? And I mean, they're more maneuverable, right? And these ships can't turn, but they're big, heavy things and they leave a big wake, and right, there's all kinds of weird stuff going on, right? Yeah.
And unlike the open ocean, where it's easy for the big ship, and they talked about this in the first leg of their trip, the ships would make they'd change 2 degrees.
Yeah, no problem.
Left.
Happy to do it.
No problem.
Right.
But they're on a road. They're on a narrow road. They can't do that.
Right. They're between the two buoys in the channel. Right. They can't slow down. They can't move.
Because there's a ship behind them. They can't speed up. Right. It's all up to you to avoid them. So I think that was a big takeaway for me as well.
Yeah, interesting. Well, what do you think? They said it so well at the end. I don't think I can add really anything else to this, but what an amazing journey. And thanks for kind of letting me be a fly on the wall and listening into this, because I just thought this was a fascinating story, not only from a sailing standpoint, from a human standpoint, right? Of a guy and his family, right? Pulling together to pull off this pretty miraculous thing. And I know people have done it 16 times, right? But it was just neat to hear it through their own perspectives. It's kind of first time crossers, in not a huge boat, it's a big boat, but right, it's not a huge boat. So really fascinating. So, Bela, thanks, and listeners, thanks for joining us for this episode and for sharing in this journey with us. We hope you found it interesting and thought-provoking, and maybe some of you are contemplating doing something like this on your own, which is really cool. If you have questions about what we've discussed, or there's some things you want to share with us, please feel free to get in touch with us. Our email is sailingtheeast, that's all one word, @gmail.com.
Hey, and if you enjoy the podcast, hit that follow button. The more followers we have, the higher we pop up in search results, and it's easier for other people or other potential listeners to find us. We'd really appreciate that. And so signing off from upstate New York, until I see you guys next time, take care.
You too, Bela. Thanks a million from here in Münster, Germany. Auf Wiedersehen.